你好,
你好。
Professor Zeitlin. Uh, First of all, I should appreciate that you allow me to have an interview with you. I, although you are very busy, I think, to teach student and advance research and write a book. So, first of all, I thank you. Let's begin with the first question. Let me know about your educational background or formal schooling.
Actually, my education is. Do you want me to hold this? My education is very simple because I was at Harvard to do my BA, my MA,
Great.
and my PhD.
Yeah.
And then eventually was also teaching there in the Department of East Asian Languages and Civilizations. So altogether, with some breaks, I spent about 17 years in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Oh, really? So, what is your doctoral dissertation?
My doctoral dissertation was on Liao Zhai Zhi.
Oh, Liao Zhai.
And eventually I adapted it and rewrote it, and it became a book, which was published in 1993, called Historian of the Strange, Pu Songling and the Chinese Classical Tale.
Oh,
And it's sitting here.
yeah.
Was published by Stanford University
Yeah.
Press.
Stanford. Oh. Historian of the Strange.
It's a translation of 意识诗.
So,
But since the strange, what the idea of the strange is a focus of the book, is another reason I
Okay.
chose the title.
oh, great. Oh, and second question is, would you please introduce your publication? Yeah, 你刚说的那个 your publication, your books. I heard that you already published several books, especially concerning Chinese fictions or Chinese drama.
Well, in terms of books, besides Historian of the Strange, I've just, another book of mine has just come out. It's a collection of essays that I co-edited with Professor Lydia Liu, who's at University of Michigan. I just gone there. And it's called Writing and Materiality in China.
Oh.
It's essays in honor of Patrick Hannon, who was both of our teachers.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to mention a little bit about this book, especially because it just came out last month. Although, like books of this sort everywhere, it's taken many years to put it together. The essays are offered to Professor Hannon, but in fact, it's not really what we think of as a Festschrift. It includes two scholars who were never students of Professor Hannon's, actually Professor Wu Heng, who's here at the University of Chicago, and Professor Eugene Wang, who's at Harvard teaching. Both of them are art historians. So what we set out to do, Lydia and I, was to put together a book that would reflect that would consist largely of things by Professor Hannon's students, but that also would be a full-fledged book about a new topic that would hold together as a book. And so we came up with this idea of writing and materiality. And this was one of the reasons why we wanted to have some additional art historians. Another focus of the book was to try and break down some of the boundaries between pre-modern and modern Chinese literature and cultural history. This is something, so in fact, again, this is reflected in our co-editorship because, of course, Professor Liu works in the modern period and I work in the pre-modern period. And perhaps it's no surprise that there are quite a number of pieces on the 19th century on sort of mid to late Qing. But the earliest essay in the book actually is by Wu Heng, and it's called What is a Rubbing? And the latest essay is by Lydia Liu, which it's on the film Liu Sanjie and some of the intellectual copyright issues surrounding it. There are a lot of wonderful articles in it.
I think so.
A very interesting article by Professor Shang Wei on Jinping Mei, and some articles on 电视代画报 and so on. I do have a long essay in it, which is called Disappearing Verses. And it's about, in fact, if I can remember the subtitle. It seems like a long time. Disappearing Verses, Writings on Walls and Anxieties of Loss. And it's really about this issue of 提笔诗 in general, but also then specifically about why, especially in the late Ming and in the early Qing, people become very interested in writings on the wall attributed to or by women. And so I have an argument about how that relates to the anxieties about the loss of the cultural legacy during the early Qing. But it's a concern that goes back certainly to the Ming and earlier. And that article has actually been published in an abridged version in Chinese in this book. This is, I don't know if you've seen this.
Zhang Hongsheng?
Yeah, Zhang Hongsheng. I was at that conference, and I think he did a really great job with this volume.
Okay.
So there's a sort of a shorter Chinese version of it.
Great.
This article on 提笔诗 is actually a kind of an offshoot of a larger interest of mine, which is a book that I've been working on for a long time. I started it after I finished Historian of the Strange. If you look at Historian of the Strange, it's on Liao Zhai, but one of the things that it doesn't deal with are the usual things we associate with Liao Zhai, like foxes and ghosts and spirits and so on. Part of the argument about the strange was that the strange is not the same thing as the supernatural, right? So the second book I decided would be on ghosts, precisely what had been left out of my discussion of Liao Zhai. So I thought I would be able to finish it very quickly, but I've been working on this book now for a long time, and it does have a tentative title. It's called, and about 3/4 of it is done. It's called Phantom Heroines, Ghosts and Gender in 17th Century Chinese Literature. So it's still actually a large part of it does still deal with Liao Zhai, but it's not only looking at ghost stories, so it's looking at ghost poetry, poetry attributed to ghosts, and also drama, which has been of late my main interest. So there are a lot of plays not starting from Mudanting, but certainly galvanized by the success of Mudanting about female ghosts, specifically about the Hundan. There's a special role type called the Hundan. And since the book is essentially interested in the representation of ghosts in the literary imagination rather than belief in ghosts, how ghosts were portrayed on stage became very important.
So what I mean is a little kind of a political view of point or gender or sexuality.
A political view of gender and sexuality. Well, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that. For instance, in this Disappearing Verses, there's certainly.
So 在这里那个蔡九弟
That's my Chinese name.
Your Chinese name is
蔡九弟.
九弟 means 那个 Judith.
Well, it's a transliteration, yes. So that's
then
that's the piece. That's the piece.
Yeah.
There's somewhat of in the book, in fact, and in an article that's being published separately, I do look at something, certain political aspects of the ghost story, specifically what I call the historical ghost story, which is about trying to deal with certain kind of traumatic historical events, but usually revolving around dynastic fall in some form or another. So in that chapter, I really sort of try and deal with some of those issues. But I don't deal very much with an argument that, ghosts are just a way of talking about this world. And people don't talk about this. They use ghosts just because otherwise they're not free to speak. Because there's so many different ways that they could express themselves. So to my mind, it's not always true, but to my mind, what's interesting is what is it about ghosts that can only be expressed in that form, whether through a ghost story, whether it's through a ghost poem, whether it's through something being staged.
So with this respect, what I meant is what you said, like you said, the ghost in the Chinese traditional fiction is, for example, 狐狸精 means contain a little negative aspects. So what I meant is, so I can call it little political or gender or concerning gender or sexuality.
Gender and sexuality is a sort of important part of my whole argument. And there is an article that I published, I guess in 97, which became a kind of pilot for the book. So you can see that it's been around. It was in a conference volume called Writing Women in Late Imperial China. It was based on a conference organized at Yale by Ellen Widmer and Kang Yi-sun Zhang that later became a volume. And that is called, I think it's called Embodying the Disembodied. And there I developed a sort of a theory about ghosts as sort of as a kind of hyper feminine.
Embody means 化身，那个什么化。
Embody doesn't mean transformation. It means something. A ghost is ordinarily disembodied, right? It's something invisible. It's something, or something invisible and unseen.
So incarnation, a kind of incarnation.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that 化身 is sort of when you're born into another body.
Yeah.
And sometimes that happens too. But this idea that ghosts, especially female ghosts, are so intensely corporeal, physical, and there are a lot of fantasies about the body that are expressed through, especially stories about liaisons with ghosts, and this fantasy, which I think is very prominent in 17th century literary works, although it has a much earlier provenance of essentially making love to a ghost and bringing her back to life, right? And in fact, it's through this interest in the body that I came to another sort of sideline interest of something that I've been working on that's also quite different, which is a long-term project I've been engaged on looking at late Ming medical cases.
Oh,
Specifically, medicine
Oh.
is a sort of a side interest of mine. I mean, I'm an amateur at it, but I have mainly been trying to look at it from 2 points of view, from the point of view, well, maybe 3, cultural history, from the history of narrative and narratology, and then also from the history of publishing and print culture, which is another of my interests, and that also comes out in that very strongly in the Writing and Materiality in China volume. I've been collaborating with basically with 2 professors. One is Charlotte Firth at USC, and the other is Professor Xiong Bingzhen at Academia Sinica in Taiwan. And we got interested in the fact that there were a lot of these case histories that start they start getting published, but you can trace back the to earlier times, but the doctors start publishing their own case histories for the first time in the late 16th century, mainly around Anhui. And I got interested in one specific doctor who is, in fact, sometimes criticized. His name is Sun Yikui. He's sometimes criticized for being too gossipy, too much detail, and he's actually a rather marvelous writer. So since I spend part of every summer in Beijing, I went over to the Zhongyi Yanzhouyuan, to their rare book library, and was able to look at his cases, which have been republished and republished many times. So I've done a study of Sun Yikui's cases, both from the point of view of narrative and both from the point of view of the history of printing. And it's part of a larger movement, actually, in the history of science called science studies, where one is looking at science as something, and medical knowledge or authority as constructed rather than as given. So I've been working with Charlotte Firth first in one conference that she organized at UCLA, which was just on medical cases from different disciplinary approaches, and I'm the sort of the literature person on the team. They're both historians. And then we organized a big conference here maybe last year.
Yeah, I heard that concerning An.
Right, concerning An, because one of the things we discovered was that that medical case, if you wanted to understand the phenomenon of medical cases, you had to understand the case in a much wider perspective and scope, and among other things, certainly it's derived from legal practice.
Actually, do you know? Do you hear that about the brown bag lectures in U of Michigan?
I haven't, but
Shirley first.
she was there.
Yeah, had a lecture.
Uh-huh.
I think. Yeah, I forgot that. March or February.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
At the time, I heard that case study. Yeah.
So did you go and hear her lecture?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. So then you have a good sense. It's been very exciting. So we're co-editing a volume, but it still is, I think, a ways to go before it comes out. So medicine has been a kind of a very interesting sideline for me.
I think so. Yeah.
But I also have found it really interesting as somebody who works on 指怪, on the strange, on anomaly. Medicine, of course, is one area. Medical records is another area where you can look at this. And even I have found that there are various kinds of what we might call ghost stories.
Ghost story.
But they're told from a very different kind of perspective. They don't have the same sort of literary agenda. They have their own medical purpose to serve. And so it's a kind of interesting foil to the literary record, which is, favors certain kinds of themes and moods.
Yeah.
So medicine has been one area. And then the other area that I've been mainly working in, as I mentioned, is theater or drama. And I first began working on Mudanting on the Peony Pavilion and published an article, a long study of a commentary on Mudanting, an article on the Three Wives commentary, the Wu Shan.
牡丹厅那个评点.
Right. Although, in a way, in fact, I have an off-print of this. If you're interested, I can give you a copy because I know you're working on Pingdian. It doesn't do very much with the Pingdian. In fact, I call it the story of the Three Wives commentary. And it's sort of a play on the idea of ji in a play title. You would be, Mudanting doesn't, but most plays like 西楼记 or 琵琶记, or we translate 西厢记, we translate as the story of. So here I did it as the story of the Three Wives commentary because I was really more interested I was less interested in the comments themselves than in the whole story and through which the commentary came into being, and what it could tell us about the play. So, and since then, I've sort of continued to work in this direction, and I'm about to, I hope to actually, finished a long article on Changsheng Dian. And Hongshengde. In fact, I'm teaching a course, a seminar on it. Su Yang and the others are taking it here, a graduate seminar. And that reflects an interest of mine that came out of looking at drama. I was interested in drama as performance, and yet, of course, I'm still really working with the long Chuanqi play texts. But so how do we understand their relationship to performance? And there are many different ways to understand it, but I think it's very much of a problem. Most of them are not, at least written, strictly speaking, purely to be read, and yet they're certainly not written to be performed as is. But one of the missing ingredients I found was music. And of course, we sort of, there's a kind of division of labor that we have, in which if you're a literature scholar, you work on the play text. If you're a theater historian, you work on kind of modern performance. And if you're a musicologist, you work on the music. And those three things are separate. So to some extent, I'm trying to combine them, although certainly my literary training is the strongest. And I can say it was a lot easier. No, it's really hard. It's a lot easier to teach yourself Chinese medicine. Chinese medicine, especially the way these Rui...
theoretically or into practice?
Well, a little bit in terms of practice, but at least trying not to try and treat the musical side of them seriously. 长生殿 is a fantastic example because the play, in a way, is all about music.
Yeah.
It's not just sung to music, but its central theme is this 霓裳羽衣, this rainbow skirts, robes and feather skirts, which is the piece of music that is a kind of central symbol and topic in the play. So, and then from there I got involved. And then from there I got, even more involved with thinking about what kinds of vocal techniques or how would what do tune titles really mean? What does it really mean when we say that they, are writing new words to old tunes? How might that work? And I got interested because if in fact you read prefaces by playwrights like Hong Shang or Kong Shangren, they talk about how closely they had to work with music tutors to do it, so that it's not really so easy for them to do that.
Earlier, I saw that book concerning Kong Shangren 的那个 English. I forgot that book. The title of that book.
Is it a recent book?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, is it by
Kong Shangren?
Strasberg? Richard Strasberg,
Yeah,
The World
I
of Kong
think so,
Shangren?
Kong Shangren. Strasberg.
Yeah, who was at
Kong
UCLA.
Shangren.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I saw that title. Yeah.
So, so another project that I've been working on has to do with late Ming and early Qing courtisans.
明末清初.
Yeah, mostly I have been working in this Mingmo Qingchu. That's been my strategy. Instead, part of this is to basically concentrate in a certain period, but within that to try and range widely. So when I sometimes say I do literary and cultural history, that's sort of what I mean. I also am very interested in interdisciplinary work, as you can hear. I'm still very focused on literature, but I like what happens in combination with other fields, thinking of it not simply as straight literature. So, and then, as you know, from the point of view of Chinese fiction and drama, late Ming and early Qing is just an incredibly rich period.
I think so.
There's just so much to do, and the more you, the more you work on it, the more you see. So, I guess. Although, at some point, I think it would be fun to work on 19th century when everything starts changing. Probably I'll stay in this sort of 100-year period for some time to come.
Okay. Oh, actually, I asked you to have an interview, but you have a lecture to me.
I'm sorry.
No, I don't think so. I think it's a very interesting and exciting experience to me. So I thank you for helping me to meet a very sincere and competent scholar like you. I really appreciate you, and I hope I don't take up your precious time. 我很感谢你。
谢谢。
好。